Welcome to Mr. Screenwrite. I'm Nick, and I've been looking for an excuse to use my Avatar: The Last Airbender art book as inspiration for a project for a long time, and then I flipped like only 2 pages in and found a picture that inspired me. So, follow along as I make Appa, the flying sky bison, out of clay. To start, I'm going to metal bend some armature wire into the general shape of Appa's body. I'm using a reference image to help. Appa's going to be about 4 inches long, and I'm leaving a long stick down the middle. That's going to be a support so he can suspend in the air because, obviously, he's got to be flying. Then I'm going to use aluminum foil to bulk out the rest of him. This helps the clay bake faster and more evenly because then it won't be solid clay. Satisfied with that shape, I rolled out a layer of clay, started covering our metal skeleton here. I used gray to make a first layer to really solidify the shape of his body, head, tail. Later I'm going to cover him with colored sculpty clay. That's going to get all the details. Now, did you know that Appa is a blend between a manatee and bison? I never really realized how true that was until I started sculpting him in gray clay because, obviously, he looks like a manatee. If I wanted to stop here, this would be a great sky bison whistle, but Appa says no. I added some metal tubes to act as supports for Appa's leg. Those are coming soon. And then made a loose base at the bottom of the support to hold it in place in the oven. That way I didn't have to lay Appa down to bake him. And now, time for some fire bending in the oven. After this first layer's baked, I mixed some brown, black, and gray clay to get the tone I wanted for Appa's underbelly. I flattened that against the baked clay to get a really strong hold, smoothed it out, and then I used the handle of a brush to sort of work notches along his belly. I decided to build it up in small layers, lock in the details I'm happy with, so that way, as I continue to sculpt, it doesn't mess up the details that I got right. So, I did his underbelly. Time for another fire-bending bake in the oven, this time just for a few minutes. After that came out, I mixed up some more gray and brown clay to get the colors of Appa's face and cheeks, and then added a little purple for his nose, and I ended up doing most of these details off camera. Now it's time to break out the white clay, because this guy is pretty much all fur. I think this is a good example of why I baked in layers, because that way I could make Appa's legs without worrying about messing up his belly. I called this stylish winter look marshmallow boots. So now I cover the rest of Appa in a smooth layer of this white clay. Again, I'm using that reference image to make sure I'm keeping his shape, not adding too much or too little. When I'm happy with the smooth shape of his fur, I used a ball tool to make an indent in his legs, rolled tubes of the same clay that I used for his belly, and cut them into 3 little short lengths, smushed them together for his toes on his feet. This is, 3 toes for 6 feet. He's got a lot of toes. Then I break out the toothbrush to add texture. At first I just kind of hit the toothbrush against Appa to make it bumpy and uneven. Then the trick here is to use the toothbrush to brush down just like you're brushing Appa's fur. I imagine there's a lot of people, if like brushing hair is therapeutic for you, Appa would be pretty fun to have around. The problem is he's kind of rocking more of the Uncle Iroh look right now, more than the Appa look. We're going to fix that later, but first, after all that fur's brushed, it's time for another fire-bending bake in the oven. With all of that set, now I could start on Appa's ears and his bowl cut because, let's be honest, Appa 100% has a bowl cut. Right here, I apologize, it's a little out of focus. I can barely see anything. So what's going on is that I mixed some brown clay with white to make a light brown and smoothed that really, really thin, cut a triangle out, and then flattened a tube of clay for Appa's arrow stripe down his back. But after I got into position, I added those perpendicular strips across his back and used the toothbrush again to texture them all into place. Then I poked 2 little holes in his hair for where his horns need to be and literally just rolled 2 thin tubes of dark brown clay, pinched the ends to taper them, and then just sort of bent them into shape. This time, how about we bake it with lightning? Warning, do not use actual lightning to ever bake clay. But I'm not just making Appa. Team Avatar needs to be on Appa too, so that means we need to make a saddle first. I mixed some white with brown to get this leathery color and flattened an oval, pushed that onto Appa's back to get it to stick. Then I shaped this front lip up like the saddle, poked holes all around using this tool. I added the little saddle tongue on the back, that's where their sleeping bags are going to go in a minute. And then to make the rim of the saddle, I just rolled some thin tubes of the same brown clay and sort of rolled one edge back to make a donut, and then put those on each corner. And that finishes our saddle pretty much. So to make the sleeping bags, I rolled out some really thin white clay, added a thin layer of light blue on top of it, and that makes it so that there's white on one side and blue on the other. And then I cut that into really small sections and rolled them up into some loose tubes and put them on the back, and that way you get the two-tone look of their sleeping bag. If Appa is about 4 inches long, then that makes Team Avatar here, I don't know if this math is accurate, but extremely tiny. So Katara is more of a triangle shape to get that hint of her dress, and then I used the same brown clay as the saddle for her head and a little darker dot on the top for her hair. Unfortunately, no hair loopies. It was just too small. Sokka's really similar, but I made him lounge against the saddle, and I added some dark blue clay for pants and just a teensy tiny little speck on his head for hair. And of course, his Momo-ness. I was as vague as possible making him. It is literally just like a long white blob with two pointy blobs for ears. Aang was definitely a little easier to stand out here. I squashed some yellow clay for his body and flattened a little red square for his collar capey thing. And then I made a lighter tan ball of clay for his head, and I mean an absolutely microscopic sliver of light blue clay along his head for his arrow tattoo. We're ready for another firebending bake, and then we're done. There he is, Appa, the flying sky bison. And to be completely honest, I'm really proud of how this turned out. This is only part 1, everyone. That's right. Here's a sneak peek of part 2, where I'm going to take this Appa that I made and I'm going to really make him fly by putting him in an animated diorama. So, subscribe now and stay tuned for that video. It's coming up pretty quick here. Check out the description below for links to the materials and tools that I used to make this project. And check out my other projects on Mr. Screenwrite. Yip Yip!